theatricality and deception. Powerful agents to the uninitiated, but we are initiated.
I'm super excited!
We find ourselves is due to our own actions or inactions. Because it is our own fault, we are the only ones who can change future events. Education seems to me to be a major part of the solution. The remaining part is the abolition of secrecy. Through ignorance or misplaced trust, we as a people have abdicated our role as the watchdog of our government. If we had done our jobs as citizens, we would never have reached this point. Most of us are completely ignorant as to even the most basic functions of our government. We have truly become a nation of sheep.
Well, I didn't know that.
Hello, and welcome to Forgotten History, the only show that unearths history's buried secrets. I am your host, Eli Kilman. This series is packed full of little bits of information forgot through the passing of time. They say, history is written by the victors. It is way too easy for a civilized terrorist group to come into an area, take over that area, capture or kill the existing civilization, then take all the pre-existing history, throw it into a hole to be buried and forgotten about, which would later set the root to a foundation hidden with lies that founded the very foundation of the rewritten history. We've seen these acts carried out many times in the past and during the present. Now, since history repeats itself, I'm sure we will see these acts carried out in future events to come. It really is sad when you stop to think about the history that has been destroyed. Information that would have answered so many unanswered questions. Oh well, there's no use crying over spilt milk. So let's move right along with our story. Join me for a second. Let's climb into our imaginary time machine. Hit the gas to 88 miles per hour and let's go back in time.
Oh, you think darkness is your ally? You merely adopted the dark. I was born in it, molded by it.
Oh my god, that's too far. Let's travel all the way back to the 40s. Okay, the 40s. The U.S. was summing up the end of World War II with Germany. Our story is set in World War II, but it has nothing to do with Germany. According to our history books, on December 7, 1941, Japan, for no reason at all apparently, attacked our U.S. Navy base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. The bombing killed more than 2,300 Americans. Now, that is what the United States of America's history books tell you. But we know from past events that America is behind a lot of its own civilian attacks. In fact, if you look at Hawaii around that time, you will soon realize nothing was going on. But yet they sent out thousands of new recruit nurses and docked all the Navy vessels in that area with newly added military forces. It was a planned attack by the U.S. government. If not planned, they knew it was coming. But that is information for a whole nother episode with endless evidence just like 9/11. Our story follows the after actions of Pearl Harbor. Let's fast forward to July 26, 1945. The effects of July 26, 1945 has slowly been forgotten about. You've heard this story before. You may have just not known about it or know enough information about it to realize it was the same story. In fact, the movie Jaws portrays this story. Think back to Jaws. Do you remember the end speech by Captain Quinn? The speech that includes, "People go into the water, sharks in the water." He was referring to the incident that happened on the U.S.S Indianapolis. Netflix also has a movie starring Nicolas Cage, based upon this true story. It wasn't that good. I shut it off within 45 minutes. Sorry, Cage. Still love you, though. In today's topic, we will be discussing the tragic tale of the crew members of the U.S.S Indianapolis. Never heard this story before? That's okay. I'll explain. The U.S.S Indianapolis was a Portland-class heavy cruiser of the U.S. Navy, named after the city. It was launched November 7th, 1931, with many successful missions. So the date now is July 26th, 1945. The U.S.S Indianapolis was on a top-secret mission. The mission was to carry pieces of the first operational atomic bomb to a drop point close to Japan, where it could later be assembled and used. The action was a result of the attack on Pearl Harbor. This bomb was nicknamed Little Boy. This moment in time was very important because it was the first use of the atomic bomb in an attack. In this photo, we see the devastating effect of the atomic bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima. This is an image taken from space. Flat Earth.
They succeeded this mission because the bomb was released days later on Japan's soil, resulting in 80,000 deaths. Okay, back to the Indianapolis. They completed the mission and was headed to the Philippines to meet up with the U.S.S Idaho to collaborate a further attack on Japan. Everything was going on plan. That is, until the U.S.S Indianapolis came to a tragic halt. On July 30th, 1945, the Navy warship was unexpectedly impacted by 2 Japanese torpedoes, so damaging that it split the giant cruiser into 2, right down the middle. They were struck halfway to their destination. After the whole ordeal, the captain of the ship was later put onto trial because he didn't apply to the routine directions to move in a zigzag pattern across the ocean waters. His reasoning behind his actions was because if the Japs sent, commonly referred to as the Heaven Shaker, then it wouldn't matter what pattern they were moving. This was a very good point. The Heaven Shaker were manned torpedoes on suicide missions. It is 100% real. You would have your Japanese soldier get into these little one-man submarines, be ejected out of the big submarine with the torpedo attached. This tactic was commonly used by Japan toward the end of World War II. Boy, I'd hate to be the guy that missed the ship, and just die traveling through open water. So basically it was a torpedo controlled by a person on the inside on a kamikaze mission. Pretty cool if you ask me. I've never heard of these things before. There is a Japanese name for them, but I cannot pronounce it. Okay, back to the story. It took the U.S.S Indianapolis all of 12 minutes to be fully submerged. The call was sent out across the ship's intercoms to abandon ship. During the water takeover of this Navy cruiser, the ship sent out distress signals up until the point all communications were lost. Sadly, they were ignored. They were ignored by the Navy and the Coast Guards because some believed it was just a joke. There was no drill training in that area scheduled for the day, and there were no clear evidence of any Navy vessel in that area being in the water. Remember, this was a top-secret mission. So secretive, in fact, when the ship didn't arrive at the destination, no one got suspicious. No actions were taken, and no one questioned a thing. 300 poor souls of the ship's fleet got trapped inside and went down with the ship as it sank. Poor guys were doomed right from the start. They were basically projected into the sea to drift alone with the winds of death at their sides, just to see their last remaining minutes of open water. Yeah, hard stuff. Oh, you thought the story was over? No, it's only beginning. So here we are in the middle of the ocean. Your Navy vessel you was traveling on was just struck by 2 Japanese torpedoes and was sunken within 12 minutes. 879 men went into the water. They went into the water all realizing it was just as dangerous as the watery grave that they chose not to contribute to. It was hell as soon as the men hit the water. 1/3 of the Navy fleet were wounded.
with severe or life-threatening injuries. No one had enough time to grab survival gear. About half of the men were equipped with life vests. Most of the men were covered in fuel left behind from the sunken vessel. Some survival rafts were found, but certainly not enough for all the men to fit into. Some of the men met the end of their fate within minutes of entering this watery grave. The dark, cold night claimed a number of injured lives. Many of soldiers claimed to have heard of moaning and groaning sounds of pain slowly fading with the moonlight as the night darkened into a complete and thought of loneliness despite being surrounded by your nearby friends. Once the sharks took their first bite of this endless buffet, they were there to stay. The scene became a feeding frenzy of human flesh for countless numbers of great white sharks. After being picked off one by the sharks, the troops formed a small group to group together to form a bigger shape, hopefully to uninterest the sharks. The plan worked for the most part, and as long as the men could keep up their strength to hold on to each other, things would be going just fine. Slowly but surely, over time, the men would start to lose strength and loosen their grip, and would be carried away with the swish of a wave, just to be claimed by a shark a few feet away, right in front of their former Navy mates. Some of the survivors state that sometimes the screams were so unbearable that it'd make you lose all hope. And other times, you'd be floating right along with your buddy, and out of nowhere, he'd be jerked underwater, never to be seen or heard from again, only to have blood resurface to the spot where he was last known to be. Sometimes there'd be screams and shrieks, and sometimes nothing, without a peep. One of the men claimed that it was the most awful, gut-wrenching, heart-pumping, scariest experience of his life. Remember, these guys were fighting in the middle of a war. Every now and then, a body that was trapped inside the ship would float up. The sharks were just as happy chowing down on these decomposing corpses. The distraction of this act would give the men a few moments of peace, but not for long. The sharks would play mind games, and they are known for this. In an attack strategy, the great white would bump into the water-bound soldier. This method was used to let down the guard of their unsuspected prey, making them think the shark was not interested and would shortly move along. But for the men, they knew this would be minutes, if not seconds, of the last remaining moments before their violent death. One by one, friends, fathers, husbands, sons, war heroes, gave off the biggest fight of their lives in the last effort of this losing battle. Days and nights of battling sharks, trying to stay afloat, no food, no water, constant sunlight and heat, freezing temperatures at night. All this would eventually take its toll on a man's mental state. On the third day, the men had a stroke of luck. A couple shipping crates washed close enough to the survivors. Although they weren't big enough to hold the weight of an average man, they could still serve a purpose. At this time, after days and days of being in the water, the life vests started to become waterlogged, making it hard for the soldiers to stay afloat and keep swimming. A few of the men gathered what strength they had left, tied these crates together, and began to set their life vests on top of the crates for the sun to dry them out. This worked perfectly, and the soldiers would keep rotating, taking turns. One of the crates had a few rotten potatoes at the bottom, in which the soldiers rationed out and ate. Although not enough to keep you alive for days, it was enough to keep you going for another day. After floating in the ocean for 4 days, the crew of the Indianapolis was spotted by a U.S. bomber on a routine patrol who quickly called in a SOS call for the remaining survivors. But it was not over yet. The closest ship vessel was miles away and would take all night to reach them. The ship vessel? Another Navy cruise ship, the U.S.S Doyle. Doyle was the closest ship that was alerted. The captain of the Doyle took it upon himself to contribute to the rescue, despite any incoming information to proceed or not to proceed.
Men were still dying through the night, being picked off one by sharks, dying from starvation, dehydration, or injuries. Just because they were spotted does not mean they are out of the water yet. By morning, the rescue cruiser was close, but not close enough. Lieutenant Marks, a pilot on the ship, took it up on himself to take a plane full of survival gear. Food, water, rafts, etc. He knew that the men were barely hanging on by a thread, but he could not prepare himself for the horrific sight that he stumbled across when he happened to fly to the rescue zone. He dropped all the survival gear into the water close enough for the men. During this time, he witnessed men still being attacked by sharks. So he did the only thing he knew to do. He landed his plane by the survivors. Upon landing in the water, he damaged a platoon. It helped with the landing gear, so he was stuck. Just as stuck as the men floating in the water for 5 days now. Did this stop him? No. He filled the plane with survivors. When there wasn't an inch to spare, the men took all the new rafts and tied them together to the plane. But there were still men in the water. He tied people to the wings of his airplane using parachute cords, just so they'd be lifted out of the water and sharks could not reach them. After the rescue was finished, only 317 men survived this horrific event. Remember, the U.S.S Indianapolis held 1,196 Navy men. They battled injuries, starvation, dehydration, sharks, and so much more. The U.S. government kept this rescue a secret for 2 full weeks until the bombs had been released on Japan's soil. Therefore, the government knew and didn't care to tell anyone. They did release the information in the media the same day the Japanese surrendered, so it got little, if not any, attention. It's so sad to see these men lay down their lives in the most horrific way, only to be swept under the rug. So next time you hear mention of the atomic bomb, I hope that your thoughts and prayers goes out to the family and friends of the members of the U.S.S Indianapolis. Well, that's gonna be it for me, guys. I hope you had a good time, I hope you enjoyed yourself, and I hope you learned something new. But most of all, I hope to see you again on the next episode of Forgotten History, a Conspired Deception original.